Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. On behalf of Equality Now and our wonderful speakers, I extend you a very warm welcome on this beautiful sunny day in New York City. Equality Now and the Alliance for Universal Digital Rights, founded by us and bringing together feminist and tech champions in the digital rights space, have continuously advocated for legislative reforms to counter online harm, including deepfakes and tech-facilitated gender-based violence, as well as a broader gender-inclusive tech policy. This is crucial in a world where we're seeing the line between online and offline become all but invisible. And the potential harms which exploit the digital space have real-world, real-life impact on women and girls. Equality Now is soon launching a series of lived experience reports which highlight the impact of these issues on women and girls across the globe, so watch out for those. Women and girls are not only more frequently targeted or less likely to receive support or justice, something that we've highlighted in our ongoing research and advocacy. The gaps in legal protection were explored in our deepfake reports, which Laura has referenced in her book. AI and other emerging technologies have enhanced the risks which we have become accustomed to in the online space, with algorithms continuing to amplify biases that promote misogyny and patriarchy that we see across society. These need to be addressed if women and girls, especially those with marginalized identities, are able to fully enjoy the opportunities and benefits that exist in the digital space. And we really do believe that technology can be harnessed and should be harnessed for good. Our work, especially with Audrey, has highlighted the need for other issues in this space, such as representation in the tech industry and in the tables where these decisions are being made. Emerging technologies on the future of work need to be highlighted at the most highest senior places. And although a lot of people say, make your own table, it's easier said than done. For example, through advocacy around the Global Digital Compact, we had it adopted at the Summit of the Future, which now includes women in the recommendations. We don't want to be fearmongers about the new and emerging ideologies and technologies. We really want to work towards a world where everyone can enjoy equal rights to freedom, safety, and dignity. So I start with welcoming Laura Bates. Laura's book was published today. So let's give her a hand to recognize that. Laura Bates, who we are so grateful to have joined us in person this morning, is an internationally renowned feminist writer, founder of the Everyday Sexism Project, and the author of the book of the same name. In her latest book, The New Age of Sexism, Laura details the way in which AI and other emerging technologies are amplifying sexism and misogyny and the potential for future harm. These include issues such as amplified gender bias and economic labor inequalities, deepfakes, online sexual abuse, and tech-facilitated gender-based violence. We're also very excited and privileged to have two other experts with us online. Dr. Joy Buolamwini is a good friend and likes to be called Dr. Joy. She's a poet of code, a Rhodes Scholar, an AI researcher, and best-selling author of Unmasking AI, My Mission to Protect What is Human in a World of Machines. She uses art and research to illuminate the social implications of AI, and she founded the Algorithmic Justice League to create a world with more equitable and accountable technology. And Amanda Manyame is one of our own. She is Equality Now's digital law and rights advisor, working with us and Audrey at the intersection of technology and law, advising governments, intergovernmental organizations, and regulators on the considerations that influence tech policy and digital governments. So Laura, I welcome you up to the podium now to read from your book and highlight some of the issues that we've raised.
Thank you so much for that very warm welcome. I want to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone at Equality Now, who I know has worked so hard to put this event on, to Sourcebooks as well for all of their hard work, and to everyone who's given up their time to be on the panel today. I'm such a huge admirer of the work of Dr. Joy and Equality Now, so this is a huge privilege for me. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for taking the time to be here and to join us online. I'm going to read a little bit from the book, which hopefully sets the scene for the conversation that we're going to have today, and that hopefully we will all continue to be having moving forwards. With billions of dollars being poured into AI development, and with many individual tech companies now valued in the trillions of dollars, an eye-watering amount of money and effort is being spent to make the world foreseen by tech evangelists like Mark Zuckerberg a reality. If these companies succeed, everything from our classrooms to our workplaces, our sexual relationships to our finance and justice systems are going to exist in a way that is substantially different from the world as we currently experience it. For many people, the idea of that world seems distant and obscure. They think of these concepts as science fiction, future technologies that do not really concern us yet. But the reality is that we are already living in the early stages of that new world. There is a consensus within the tech community that even if all AI development stopped today, we would still make huge advances by building applications on top of the existing foundations. We aren't waiting for a developmental milestone that may or may not happen. The tech is already here. The question is, what are we going to build with it? Already, algorithms used to determine credit offers, healthcare access, and court sentencing are in place across the world and have been proven to discriminate actively against women and minoritized communities. Already, many thousands of women have had intimate images and videos of themselves captured and shared across websites with millions of monthly views. They just might not know it yet. Already, schoolgirls are being driven out of the classroom by deepfake pornography created for free at the click of a button by their young male peers. Already, women are being sexually assaulted on a regular basis in the metaverse. Already, men are using generative AI to create ideal companions, the women of their dreams, customized to every last detail from breast size to eye color to personality, only lacking the ability to say no. Already, you can visit an establishment in Berlin where an artificially animated woman will be presented to you covered in blood and with her clothes torn if you so desire, for you to treat her however you please using virtual reality. Move fast and break things was Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg's motto back in the company's early days. As the power and indeed danger of his platform came into focus, he later changed the motto to move fast with stable infrastructure. The messaging might have changed, but the underlying attitudes have not. These technologies are evolving and multiplying, not yearly, not monthly, but daily. However, technology itself is not the problem here. In fact, many of these emerging tools possess the potential to have a transformative, positive effect on our society. What matters is how we shape and use them.
Laura, thank you for that. You describe a new frontier of sexism in your book, Powered by AI. What do you see as the most urgent threat that we are facing today?
I actually think perhaps the most urgent threat we're facing is a lack of awareness and understanding. I have faith in people. I think that if enough people realized what was happening and how it was happening now, that there would be collective resistance, collective willingness to stand up, to demand change, to demand regulation, which is what we need to see. I think one of the greatest dangers we face is a lack of awareness of the fact that these issues are being implemented right now. And a big part of that comes down to media, to headlines that we repeatedly see about the idea that the potential threats of AI are future dystopian ones. Will robots eventually take over the world? With a real lack of awareness that actually women's lives, the lives of marginalized communities, are being impacted in devastating ways right now. It should not be the case that it's possible for tools to be already in use across the US, for example, in healthcare systems where 200 million patients a year are treated, that we know actively downgrade the number of Black patients identified as needing extra care by more than half. Or that in a world where we already face a $17 billion global gender credit gap, that it is possible for financial services firms already to be using algorithms to determine credit scores that we know actively discriminate against women. The problem is that this is being allowed to happen unchecked, that the discrimination we are, so many of us in this room, committed to fighting against and trying to eliminate is instead being built into the foundations of the future world we will have no choice about living in ways that will be almost impossible to unpick later on if we don't tackle it now at this stage. So I think for me, apathy, a lack of willingness on behalf of governments around the world to stand up and show leadership in taking action now, and a lack of knowledge amongst the general population of what we need to demand are perhaps the biggest threats.
Absolutely. And as you point out, the urgency is right now. We can't wait for next year or the year after to figure this out because it's already in our midst. What do you think governments and platforms are getting wrong? And why do you think there is this apathy where, governments, after all, are powered by the people, you'd hope? So why this apathy, and how do we increase the knowledge among people to make sure that we hold them accountable?
Well, I think the answer to that question is summed up by who's having dinner at the White House.
Yeah.
I think the answer to that question is in the photographs of the inauguration ceremony and who's standing alongside President Trump. Sadly, I don't think that the lack of government action on this comes down to a lack of knowledge or awareness. It's not happening accidentally. I think that there is an extremely powerful tech lobby in very worrying proximity to democratic power at the moment. And I think that what we are seeing is democracy being subverted in the service of technological profit making, not technological progress, but profit making for a very, very small group of very, very rich white men. And this isn't about being anti-tech or innovation. It's not about saying to governments, stop progress. We don't want AI tools to be developed. It's actually about saying these tools are too important to be sublimated into the service of that very, very small number of men and their very, very deep pockets. The reality is that there are ways in which these tools could be harnessed for such positive good for society in an egalitarian way, in a way that is positive and useful for all of us. I think that at the moment there has been a very concerted and a very effective campaign by the tech lobby to convince governments around the world and people around the world that it is simply impractical and just too difficult to ask or expect them to regulate their products. But we wouldn't accept that when it came to any other industry. It would sound absurd if multinational food companies said, well, millions of people around the world, they consume our products every day. So of course, some of them are going to die of salmonella. You can't hold us responsible for that. A few people in our factories will be dying every day. It's just the price of doing business. We wouldn't accept it in any other industry. And I think it's been a really, really effective concerted campaign to get us all to accept that, when the reality is that, of course, it is possible for these companies to regulate. They just won't do it unless they're forced to, because it has a very, very slight impact on their bottom line.
Yeah. So bringing it back to you, Laura, how did you get to writing this book? Was it something that you experienced personally, or would you share your story with this audience here?
Sure. Well, before this, I had been working for a long time on the issue of online misogynistic extremism and the male supremacy inherent in online spaces, and trying to sound the alarm, I guess, over the last decade about the ways in which we were witnessing a global, algorithmically facilitated radicalization of an entire generation of young men and boys. This, for me, is a clear and natural progression of that work. We are gradually, collectively starting to wake up to those issues and to talk about them now belatedly. What we're seeing now, I think, is a similar issue, but on a massive scale. All of the things that we have seen, all of the failings that we have seen with social media, it is about to be repeated, but on a much, much grander scale. So voices were raised at the very early days of social media, voices of warning, mainly voices of women of color, who are so often the canaries in the coal mines, worst affected, first affected, most likely to be ignored when they raise important objections. Of course, development happened at breakneck speed, and we are now in a situation where for so many of us, social media is inextricably intertwined with our lives. We have to use it for our professional work. It is part of our media, it's part of our politics, it's a huge part of our social lives. It's now become unavoidable and so frankly big and profitable that it's almost impossible retroactively to hold its creators responsible for the daily harms that women and marginalized groups experience. What we're about to see is a repetition of that, but on a global scale. So for me, this is kind of a natural development of the work that I had been doing in those spaces around the kind of tech-facilitated gender-based violence. And it was also personal. The men who sent me hundreds of rape threats and death threats for the work that I did around day-to-day sexism started using deepfake technology to make that abuse exponentially more impactful, if you like. And in the work I do with young people, I was meeting with girls who are maybe 10 or 11 years old when they were experiencing these technologies being harnessed directly to harm, abuse, harass, and silence them. And if this is something that is hugely impactful for me to experience, someone sending me a deepfaked image of themselves seeming to rape me, as somebody who has been in this world and experienced those kinds of abuse for 10 years, imagine the impact on an 11-year-old girl witnessing those kinds of images being created and then being spread amongst her male peers. I was seeing girls dropping out of school. I was seeing girls confined to their bedrooms, unable to leave the house, girls developing PTSD. And while that's just one facet of the enormous ways in which these issues are presenting, for me it was a very moving and an urgent example of the broader problem.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Appreciate it. Let's move now to our online guests. We'll start with Dr. Joy. So you have called out major tech companies for deploying bias algorithms. How do you see the link between corporate accountability and the legal change that we want to see in the world?
Well, I mean, what I've seen is a lot of corporate capture, and that has been our experience with the Algorithmic Justice League, with our advocacy around biometric rights, and in particular, facial recognition technologies. And so I do think, yes, we need the legal reform, but as Laura was saying earlier, when we raise general, broader public awareness, that's where we get the political will. So we were able, for example, in the United States to have cities like San Francisco, Boston, Cambridge, Brookline, and others actually pass moratoria on the use of AI-filled facial recognition. And that came from advocacy on multiple prongs. One was having empirical data, which was hard to refute. So some of the research we did with the Algorithmic Justice League at MIT showing bias in products from IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, racial bias, gender bias, intersectional bias on those factors. It was also really important to have the documentary Coded Bias and to have art exhibitions, multiple ways of reaching everyday people. Because yes, academic papers will go so far with institutional power, but narrative power is so essential, particularly if we're trying to move anything on the legislative side. And oftentimes, once people know what's at stake, it makes it easier to mobilize. Too much of what goes on with AI harms we don't know about until we get maybe a headline or somebody famous, right? So even having the Defiance Act that was introduced in the US to curb deepfakes, or at least give people the right to sue, that made progress because it happened to Taylor Swift, right? But as we also know, it's happening to young girls and young women all around the world. And so I do think it's so important now more than ever with the kind of books that are coming out. Laura, this is such a wonderful contribution. I think this is exactly what we need to mobilize that public will to add international pressure as well as federal pressure for sure. So what we've seen, at least in the US, is at the municipal level, we've been able to push for changes. We've also seen that we don't have to wait for regulation, or we don't necessarily have to wait for laws. So we were successful with the Algorithmic Justice League in having all of the US-based companies we audited, so Microsoft, IBM, and Amazon, stop selling facial recognition technology to law enforcement after quite a bit of advocacy with many coalition members. And part of that is we made it distasteful to say you're using facial recognition in this way. And so at the time, there was a risk to the reputation and the amount of money they might be able to make when it came to, are we using facial recognition or not? Now, again, these narratives switch back and forth, administrations make a difference and so forth. But the momentum I saw we were able to gather in 2019 is something I think we can do again. And people, the more they know, the more political will we can actually summon. And when we're talking about what's going on with deepfakes and who's being impacted, I could think of no better rallying call.
Yes, absolutely. So you speak about movements and how movements like those represented here today that you're speaking about as well. What can we do more of to make sure that these systems are being held to account and people actually understand what is going on right now?
I really think documenting and sharing stories makes such a difference. We actually just finished a new report called Comply to Fly about the use of facial recognition technologies by airports within the United States. What was meant to be a pilot program has since become a more or less a de facto program, even though it was meant to be voluntary. And we're actually able to collect data, share it with the Department of Homeland Security, and have some changes made with the last regime, last administration, in terms of notifying people of their right to opt out. There's certainly more to do, but we've seen time and time again being able to gather the empirical evidence to have institutional power, right? So this is, a project I'm doing as part of my fellowship with Oxford University. It's building on the MIT research and so forth. But pairing that with narrative power is where I think we really have an opportunity. And so the organizations gathered here today, can we start collecting real stories of people who've been impacted? We know it's out there, and there's a way to collect it and aggregate it so we're not necessarily exposing people who don't want to be exposed. But I think those powerful stories positioned with the right timing can actually have us push towards the changes we want to see. I never, ever underestimate the importance of sharing your story and sharing the stories of our sisters. That is literally the foundation of what started, so much of my personal research, the Algorithmic Justice League and so forth. So I think there's a huge opportunity to start collecting these stories, start getting some empirical evidence, noting what's happening, and then finding compelling ways. It might be a poem like, can machines ever see my queens as I view them? Can machines ever see our grandmothers as we knew them? So make it so people can't unsee what is going on, and then use that to apply pressure to both the companies and also different governments and regulators.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we are doing a series, as I mentioned in my introduction, around collecting those stories around the world. So you're absolutely right. Storytelling is crucial in understanding the lived experience of what this entails. So if you were to look into the future a little bit, Dr. Joy, what would you say are the long-term consequences, both harmful and good? Because I really do believe that AI can be used for good, to leave us with some hope that we can actually use AI for good if it is managed and led by women's voices.
Got it. So do you want me to talk about what I see going sideways or what I see being more hopeful?
Well, both, right? The real picture and then what we can hope for, I hope.
Sure. I've really been thinking about biometric rights quite a bit lately. Yes, in the context of non-consensual deepfakes, as Laura talks about, but also in the context of war and lethal autonomous weapons systems. We already know the cost of war disproportionately falls on women as well. Now you have drones with guns, with AI fueled systems for targeting individuals, whether it's facial recognition or figuring out different types of targets. So I actually think, kind of like we had a convention on conventional weapons, it's really important. And I think especially led by women to truly think about the future of war, because this is where we are seeing so much AI adoption right now, because the major powers want to have AI supremacy on the battlefield, and there are very few breaks at all. So I think that's especially important for us to keep our eye on. And I do have a poem around that called Precisely Who Will Die. But you did ask for some positivity, right? So I'll switch to that side. Yesterday, I literally just landed back from Mexico City. I was privileged to be able to talk to 10,000 students there. And while I was in Mexico, my Spanish is not the best. And so being able to have AI translation tools helped me better connect with the people who were around me. Now, I think there are better ways to do it so that it's not privacy invading and so forth. But this ability to share those stories, right, that maybe we might not be able to understand as easily, I think is a major use of AI systems. I was in the Museum of Anthropology, and it's a beautiful museum. It's made for Mexico, so most of it is in Spanish. So the reason I was able to even follow along a little bit was because of having AI tools. And then it was even much better when I had my friends who could give me additional narratives as well. So I do think there's quite a bit that will be enabled when it comes to language and understanding and making new friends and connections that can be helped by AI systems. And that's another gap to address. So much of the AI progress that has been made has been very English based, and that's just a small fraction of the world. So I think there's huge opportunity there as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Joy. And now welcoming Amanda. So from your legal perspective, Amanda, what are the biggest blind spots in existing laws when it comes to deepfake abuse and tech-facilitated gender-based violence?
Oh, I think the most glaring blind spot is that many legal systems are not fit for purpose. So in many countries around the world, we're just using laws that were meant for the offline world. In as much as these harms are part of a continuum of violence, particularly against women and girls, a lot of the laws either require physical contact, they require you to be actually raped. You'll find that there are a number of women that we have been privileged to engage with, and they'll tell you when they go to a police station to report maybe their images being used against them, that the first question they are asked is, were you harmed? And the harm that these officers are asking for is physical harm. So there's a lot of ask around physical contact or the physical harm. They'll ask you, is there monetary exchange? Or a big issue we're seeing is around the narrowly defined pornography or obscenity laws. And a lot of these laws are also quite moralistic. And this leaves survivors of any form of online harm, and particularly AI-driven harm, in instances where you have to even prove that it's not yourself. And because it's not yourself, as Laura Bates says in her book, the question is, well, if it's not you, then where's the problem? So you're finding that a lot of these laws do not translate to the online world. They do not necessarily fit for the harms that we are seeing. At an international level, the treaties that we do have, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, it does provide for the right to safety and dignity. But the challenge is, what does safety and dignity mean? So, because there isn't really clarity around what that safety and dignity means, you'll find that a number of other laws, such as the right to privacy as well as freedom of expression, which are pretty much entrenched as laws, both online and offline, then tend to trump what that safety and dignity mean. So, the glaring gap is that in practice, the laws that we have are not survivor centric. They're also a patchwork of laws. You'll find that there's civil defamation laws, there's data protection laws, there's cyber crimes laws, there's pornography laws. And that just leaves this patchwork of legal remedies that survivors may use. And in a lot of instances, survivors are actually not able to use because the different laws do not actually capture the form of harm that someone would have suffered.
Thank you for that. So what do you think an effective framework would look like, a legal framework to combat these AI-driven gender harms at a national level, or as we work on an international levels, both levels? How would you suggest we address this? It's a big
I think
question, I
firstly,
know.
we have to, it is. I think just picking off of what Dr. Joy and Laura have already spoken about, we realize that we don't necessarily have a tech problem, but we have a societal problem. So one of the first things that we need to even think about before we start developing these legal frameworks or amending the legal frameworks is trying to critically examine how we ensure that discrimination and biases in society are not mimicked, replicated, or exaggerated in the design, deployment, and use of AI and any other form of tech. We need to also critically examine the existence of sufficient systems in society to ensure that any accountability or reparation when damage is caused by the use of AI will actually work in the specific society you're talking about. We also need to ensure that there's adoption of equality by design, safety by design principles as a human rights-based and feminist-informed approach. We do that by first telling the stories of survivors. We do that by going into the very communities to help people to understand what the problem is, where the problem is, also identifying where the laws don't work. I will give an example of some of the work that we've been doing in Kenya, where there's a lot of legal reform around the Sexual Offences Act and the Countering and Trafficking of Persons Act. And this is very good progress because these laws are essentially going to tackle the issues we're talking about, AI-driven harms within the context of Kenya. But one of the challenges you get is there's an understanding that Kenya has laws, they're going to reform these laws, but the issue is around the implementation of these laws. So how do we make sure that as we are reforming and coming up with new laws, we don't have an implementation issue? We do that by engaging all the stakeholders, understanding where the existing gaps are and how we plug those gaps as we develop new laws. And we then amplify what we're learning in Kenya, what we're learning in Mexico or any other country, we amplify it at international level. So we don't have a patchwork of laws that understands what the US context is, but that does not understand the fact that it's very difficult to hold tech companies to account in the global south. So we have to really work at a national level, but amplify all the learnings at international level. So it's a very difficult question to answer, but I think by following some of these steps, we'll be at least able to have more effective legal frameworks at national and international level.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you for all you do for equality now. Just a quick question for all panelists to wrap this up and go to Q&A. What is one concrete step, legal, technical, or societal, as you spoke about, Laura, that we have to take now to ensure a more equitable digital future? I'll start with you, Amanda, and then go to Dr. Joy and then to Laura.
I believe it is starting with the law. I know the law doesn't solve everything, but I believe it provides a set of societal values. It provides a baseline where we can start to talk about the issues and not just, push down in people's throats that this is against the law, but it definitely does set a sort of baseline on what is acceptable in society and what is not acceptable in society.
Thank you. Dr. Joy?
Can I respond with a point?
Yes, please.
for this. I think it's so important that we continue to use our creativity when it comes to thinking about how we have conversations with everyday people on technical work. And I'm so inspired by the work we did with the Brooklyn tenants who were having facial recognition systems installed in their apartment buildings, in their homes, and they were able to actually push back successfully. And I wrote this poem in their honor, and for also others who I consider the ex-coded, those who have been convicted, condemned, otherwise hurt by AI systems. And the truth is, we all risk being ex-coded. So to the Brooklyn tenants, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces, we celebrate your courage. No silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, hallway gatherings, Sharpies and posters, coalitions, petitions, testimonies, letters, books like Laura's, research and potlucks, dancing and music. Everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, resisting and prevailing against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction. We stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate the people have a voice and a choice. When defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights, the victory is ours.
May I give two? I think we've talked a lot about regulation and about legislation, and they are so important. But of course, these are very, very new forms of centuries-old problems. And tackling that societal racism and misogyny is absolutely crucial at the same time. We don't just need to make it impossible for these boys of 11 years old to be easily and freely accessing tools that can enable them to abuse their female peers in these ways. We also need to change the fact that they think that's an acceptable thing to do. And that can only come through education, through high quality, age appropriate, all age sex and relationships education around gender stereotypes and how they hurt young people of all genders, boys included, around sexual consent, around healthy relationships, around respect and boundaries. I think we have to think really powerfully and bravely about what a new world of education needs to look like to meet this moment. And I also think for anyone who might be listening to this thinking, this is all very well, but what can I do? You know, I'm one person. Perhaps this all sounds a bit scary, and perhaps I don't really feel like I fully grasp and understand some of these concepts and some of this tech. There are incredible organizations, feminist-driven organizations like the Algorithmic Justice League, like Equality Now, like charities Glitch or Chain, who do grasp and understand these issues and are working so hard on behalf of all of us to tackle them in meaningful, systemic, legislative ways. And we can all support them. We can sign their petitions. We can spread awareness amongst our communities of the work that they're doing. We can fund them. We can donate to them. And I think that that is another really empowering and important step we can take.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Skipper.
Yeah.
So we'll open it up to questions. My team will walk around with these little handheld mics. So ask your question, direct them if you will. And if you will, please keep them to questions and not comments. So it will be much appreciated. Thank you.
This is really a question for, Dr. Joy talked about biometric rights. I guess this is a question for Amanda or any of you, but what is the ownership rights of one's image? When the police or other officials ask, what's the harm that's been done to you? Does a woman own her image that's been deep faked and manipulated? What are the ownership rights around that?
Amanda, do you want to take that as a lawyer in the room?
Sure. That's a very interesting question because we've just seen the Dutch government recently pass a law around ownership ownership of your image. And it's a quite interesting law because it's new, but it's a concept that has been discussed around, do you actually own your image, and what is the copyright around ownership of your own image? The challenge with ownership of your own image, particularly from a copyright law perspective, if you don't have a specific law like the Dutch do now, is that you then have to prove the fact that it is copyrightable. So as it stands in the rest of the world is you don't necessarily have the copyright to your image, which is why the deepfake of Taylor Swift was a little bit different for a number of women around the world, because technically her images are copyrightable if she doesn't already have a copyright. So she would have access to laws such as that. But a number of ordinary women would not necessarily be able to use that, would really not be able to use copyright of their images, sadly. So in theory, yes, an alternative would be around the right to privacy. So being able to apply your country's right to privacy to your image, or to content about you. But again, you still have to meet all the criteria of when the right to privacy would apply. You also have to apply the criteria of who is a data controller, who is a data processor. Another issues around like the right to be forgotten when you're trying to have the content taken down of the different platforms. So again, the issue is, in theory, the laws should work, but because they're not fit for this purpose, they have specific asks for you to be able to meet them. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to do that.
And adding to what you're saying, it's important to think about a whole set of biometric rights. And so one, yes, you might think about the right to your face or your face print. There's also your voice print as well. There's your movement, there's your gait, actually any part of your body, right? Like if you took a specific print, would be unique to you. So that's why you'll see sometimes there's palm printing and other elements. So I actually do think the space of biometric rights needs to be established and then implemented and understood that it goes beyond the face. We saw this even right with Kenya with World Coin and another biometric looking at iris scans and so forth. So I think it's important to think about it in a comprehensive manner. And I don't know any laws in any country that really give a full coverage of biometric rights. And I do think copyright is a starting place that we've seen. I think we need to establish another way of thinking about digital rights when it comes to generative AI capabilities that just were not, part of what was available when privacy and copyrights were being established in the first place. But I think it's especially important to understand biometric rights as being multifaceted and multidimensional as we're evolving what it needs to look like.
Yes, absolutely. Laura, there's a question for you online. In many communities, including ours, modesty and privacy are sacred values. With the rise of deepfake pornography and cyber harassment, how can grassroots networks, faith-based or otherwise, build digital literacy and defense mechanisms to protect women without isolating them from opportunity?
That's a really, really powerful question. I actually think that one really important solution here, particularly at that grassroots organizational level, is educating parents. We are in a unique global moment that has never happened before and will never happen again, and yet it's one we rarely discuss, which is one where a generation of non-digital natives are parenting and educating a generation of digital natives, and it leaves them lost and bewildered. And actually supporting parents to understand how to support young people, to have an awareness of their rights, to have an awareness of source skepticism and digital literacy and so on, can be hugely impactful, because we can't rely on legislation alone here. We need that community activism, that community cohesion. Even where we do see legislation enacted, it too often has loopholes. In the UK, for example, there's been a lot of fanfare made about recent legal progress that we've made, but the definition of intimacy, for example, is a very white Western definition. It does not necessarily work. Those laws do not necessarily protect women who might experience all the same identical harms from a deepfake image, for example, that shows them without a headscarf if they usually wear one. That is not covered. And even the loopholes that we have, I mean, for this book, I interviewed a young woman whose life was destroyed by the sharing of intimate images of her by an ex-partner across the internet, across porn sites, across social media. And her life was turned upside down by this for years. She developed PTSD. She went through horrendous things. And after years of a hugely traumatic police investigation, the police announced that they were going to finally arrest her ex-partner. And on that day, he sent her a text message, and it said, it was me. I did this, but I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. And the police contacted her that day and said that the legal requirement at that time was for their intent to cause distress to be proven. And because he had texted her saying that he didn't mean to hurt her, they couldn't continue with the investigation. It ended there. There was impunity, legal impunity, after everything she'd been through. So we need to go further than relying on imperfect legislation that is so often too slow to catch up with women's needs and with the needs of marginalized women in particular. And community action and cohesion is vital, and so is community response. One of the other cases I reported on in the book was one of a case in a very small village in Spain where there was a massive deepfake attack on girls of around 11 years old. And the community, led by one particular woman, Dr. Miriam Aladib, really stood up, the mother of one of the girls involved, and said, there is no shame here. There is no shame for these girls. Their shame belongs with the perpetrators who have done this. And the community really rallied around the girls. And we saw a really different landscape in terms of the societal impact and the way in which they were judged and treated by society. So there is a lot that we can do as faith-based and community organizations to facilitate that understanding and learning and that shift in values as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, we are working a lot on this rise of impunity and actually speaking to men about these issues too. You know, we can't leave them out of the conversation because, thank you. Quick question for Amanda, and then we'll come straight to you. Amanda, what role do you think CEDAW can play in the accountability of AI tech companies for upholding women's rights in the design, development, and deployment of artificial intelligence? This is an online question.
Thank you. I think CEDAW as it is a very good convention. And I think what we would maybe need from CEDAW now is a general recommendation that specifically speaks to online harms, and not just online harms as we are seeing them, but online harms as they could manifest in the future. So maybe if there's anyone from the CEDAW committee listening, maybe we could work together on a general recommendation around this specific area, because we do need to start guiding companies on what safety by design looks like, on what equality by design looks like. So before we even get to the law, we need to have the tech companies themselves coding safety, coding equality, and then we also get to the law itself. So member states also mandating that the tech companies have these design mechanisms embedded already before the deployment and use of the technology.
Yeah, thank you. We had a question back there.
Thank you so much to Laura and to Dr. Joy and Amanda for all of your work and your scholarship. My question is around what you mentioned, engaging men. I count myself one of 4 men in the room, 5 men, one of whom is a wonderful tech support for us. Yes, you're speaking about the urgency to protect women and girls and establish rights and protections against AI technologies that are doing harm, but you're also speaking about fundamental human rights. So I feel that there is a lack of urgency for men and boys around human rights issues. So I'd like to ask you, who are your current collaborators, co-conspirators, allies, and activists who are men? How are they showing up? And what lessons can we all learn about how to encourage other men and boys who aren't yet engaged in doing this work and highlighting visibility on these issues?
Yeah, I can take it and pass it on to you. At Equality Now, we work with a number of men's groups. So we work with Equimundo, we work with Men Engage, we work with other men's groups around the world. So very much is a conversation about both of us, right? It can't be a conversation had in roomfuls of women or roomfuls of men. It really has to be a way of engaging where we all appreciate that what we're doing is for the betterment of society and for the next generation, and not limited to just, one gender or another. I mean, the reality is the research does show that it's women and girls who are more attacked or more vulnerable to these kinds of abuses. But I think that the education piece of it needs to be multifaceted. So I agree with you.
In the UK, there's a fantastic group called Beyond Equality. This is a group that trains young men to go into schools and talk to boys about all of these issues, very much in a feminist framework to educate them around respect and consent, healthy relationships from a feminist perspective, but with men talking to other men to pass on that message. And I'm also lucky to work with Equimundo, with the Global Boyhood Initiative, who are also doing a lot of work, not just to focus on that education piece and the responsibility I think that men have to take on that labor of educating other men, of providing role models for the young men in their lives to think about alternative forms of masculinities and the ways in which those young men might themselves be harmed by patriarchal systems and stereotypes, but also looking at how we change the online landscape, where so much of the kind of hearts and minds battle is happening. So Equimundo, for example, is working on Link Up Labs, which is a project which looks at how we transform those online environments and how we harness the men and boys who are showing up and helping us and doing this work to really spread those messages and to change what the online landscape looks like, because that is where so often we are losing young men to radicalization before we even reach the point of intervention.
Yeah,
Amanda, Dr. Joy, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. So I'd like to add to that with the Algorithmic Justice League, actually one of our most popular workshops is called Drag versus AI, where we bring in drag queen. We kind of play with gender in all kinds of ways, but it encourage people with multiple gender expressions to actually question AI systems. This past summer, we actually partnered with NBA star Jaylen Brown, and we brought boys and girls who were middle schoolers and high schoolers to engage in that workshop. And it led to conversations about, what does it mean if you are aged as being much older than you are as a young person of color, and how that disproportionately impacts the boys, while we're also having conversations about what disproportionately impacts the girls as well. And I think it is really important that we continue to engage in places and spaces that might not always be so obvious, that we're mixing basketball, NBA stardom, and drag queens, right? But it's creating a fertile place for conversation, for curiosity, and for discovery. But I think it's such an important component, echoing what fellow panelists have shared.
And I think for all of us in this room, the discussions really begin at home, right? Because if you look at the website for A Call to Men, they have something they define as the man box. Interestingly, that definition starts when boys are as young as 4 or 5 years old. We have research that shows that young children are very much feminist in their thinking, with the dependence on the mother and sisters and so forth. And that changes as they get older because of what their friend circle and the surrounding sort of chatter around being a man represents. So on many levels, if you again read the research, men hold a lot of emotional scars because of this, because I can speak from my own son, for example. They don't want to be defined like that. So I think there is a real opportunity to have those discussions at home. And while all of this may sound very scary and very big, which it is, I think there is room for each one of us to do something in our own lives. And so please get Laura's book. It's excellent. I was lucky enough to read an early copy, and it's very practical and common sense. It gives us lots of tools to work from. So thank you, Laura. Look at our website and look at what we've done with Audrey. Many of you can join if you'd like to get more updates or information and learn more about the space in which we're looking at, of course, the laws, but also on how do the laws actually impact the lived situation of people. And there is an urgency around this topic that we really have to get on right away. And then, just to remind you all, we'll close the session, but we are around till about 1:30 or so. So please take the chance to meet each other, turn around and say hello to someone you don't know, and stay in touch, because we really appreciate you being here. Thank you.